So when you come from Europe, you can't expect that people will know who you are or what you've done. And you kind of have to restart from scratch.
So you need to build your own system, but it's always good maybe to learn more from the errors of others.
There is one typical error mode, which is trying to outsource it. So you say, okay, I'm gonna hire a very senior, very seasoned head of US. That never works. If you do that, 95% chance that it fails.
Today, we're so thrilled to welcome Martin Mignot, one of the most defining voices in European venture. Martin has spent more than a decade backing the companies that reshaped how we live, from Deliveroo, that changed the way that we eat, to BlaBlaCar, that changed the way that we travel, to Revolut, that changed the way that we bank. The firm behind Figma, Robinhood, Adyen, and Deliveroo, with more than $10 billion under management and a reputation as one of the world's most iconic venture capital firms. So we're delighted to dive into this conversation with Martin Mignot, partner at Index Ventures.
So how is that possible? How does that happen?
It's easier to be born global than to go global. That's kind of one of the taglines from the book. So the earlier you can think about the US and the rest of the world, the better. But only these people had them before anybody else did, because they had this unique insight. And that to me, that's the magic. When you hear that unique insight, they just go for it.
And we helped with giving visibility to the books on our LinkedIn. Yeah, no, it's great. Yeah, we're gonna speak a bit about the book. Yeah, how did it come, the idea of starting this book?
Yeah, so, Index Press in general. So this book is part of Index Press, and Index Press is a set of resources that we've put together over the past decade or so. You can go on Index Ventures website and go check it out. And you have resources about compensation, about org design, and about international expansion. Those are three of the main topics. And they're always topics that are evergreen, so that every entrepreneur, regardless of stage and location, will kind of have these questions. And obviously, US expansion and international expansion in general is a topic that comes back and again across every single entrepreneur, regardless of geo and sector and stage. And so the approach that we have with Index Press is always the same. We try to mix quantitative elements with qualitative elements. So typically for this book, for example, we studied 500 venture-backed European tech companies across different cohort age. And we also interviewed more than 40 top founders and operators, Daniel Ek and Nikolai from Revolut and Ilka from Supercell and many other, to kind of bring together both the data and bring them to life with the stories of these people who have expanded globally, have expanded to the US, and how they did it. So that's the background behind this book.
Because it's happened to us that suddenly you can't hear anything. Yeah, I think that's perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, that's fantastic. And you've started your career in Europe, right? And then you decided to move to the US and open up the index offices in New York, and that's a huge challenge. How was that? It's been already some years now.
Yeah, it's been 3 years. Yeah,
3 years. And how has it been? Obviously, so we've been we went to New York 3 weeks ago.
Okay.
It's crazy, man. It's that city.
It's a different world. Yeah.
Wow. I mean, it's amazing.
Yeah.
And at the same time, it's kind of the Wild West,
How the Wild East.
Yeah, the Wild East. Yeah. How has it been for you?
Yeah, I mean, so to your point, I spent 15 years in London. Most of my career is there. 13 years at Index in London, and then I moved to New York 3 years ago to help open the Index office there. Maybe just before getting into how it was, maybe the rationale behind it was threefold. One was we saw that the New York tech scene was really growing, and that we had made a lot of investments in New York in the past, flying in and out essentially. We invested in Datadog and in Etsy, in Squarespace, a lot of the really good New York-based tech companies. But we realized that it had become so big and more competitive that we had to kind of have a local presence to invest locally and to help invest locally. And we also realized that a lot of European entrepreneurs, when moving to the US, were choosing New York instead of the Valley and instead of Boston. And so we thought it was really important to kind of really help them by having a presence and by doing it ourselves, being able to, write a book like this and sharing our own personal experience doing that. And the last thing was really to help Index itself. well, we have an office in London, we have an office in San Francisco, and having, something in the middle to kind of really create this bridge and this connection, because it's the same team that looks at everything globally, was really helpful to have people in the middle who can, translate, make sure that everyone is on the same page, really help collaborate, help kind of sync up. So those were kind of the main motivations, and it's proven totally right. So I think you're correct that it's a very intense city. There's a real kind of hustle culture. I think the working culture is very more intense than in Europe. I think that is for sure. And the ecosystem is really blossoming in many ways. We've made a lot of local investments, but not only local, but we've invested quite a bit in New York. And the thesis of helping European entrepreneurs has really played out. So one of the first things I did when I moved there was to create a community of the Europeans of New York. And there's about 250 founders now in that community from all over Europe. And we do quarterly events, kind of fireside chat. So I invited Oli from Datadog, I invited Mario from Oscar, Severin from Duolingo, Alex Rinker from Celonis. So kind of all of the big European success stories in the US. And then kind of really to share their learnings and their experience and kind of really help the rest of the community kind of get together. And so that's been really successful. And I think on a personal basis, after a while kind of doing the same thing in the same place, it's easy to become a little bit kind of complacent, and you kind of the network, the people, so it gets kind of the same. And moving to a totally new ecosystem with different players where no one really kind of knew who I was and what I had done before. That is something we share in the book, which is you may be extremely successful in Europe or even successful in Europe, but that doesn't really translate to the US market. And people are like, okay, Revolut, whatever, so
no way.
Yeah, I mean, because they're not really that present there, and so so it's, and American people are very US centric. I think that is clear. And so when you come from Europe, you can't expect that people will know who you are or what you've done. And you kind of have to restart from scratch. Obviously, Index had a very strong brand, so that was helpful. But, I loved it because it was a new challenge to kind of, build a brand, build a network, and, try to be original as to how you do that.
That's so much fun. And obviously, New York is a great place because there's like a huge critical mass of talent.
Yeah.
But we've been now that we see a lot of European founders shining. I think this past 2-3 years we've seen so many good companies being created in Europe. And Ruben and I are doing a little bit of an analysis of where to move if you're building a big company in Europe. And New York is as you say really close to Europe. You can fly directly from London, and it's not like SF, which is an amazing city, but it's too far away for us Europeans, right? But one question that I have, maybe it's there's other places I don't know, Miami, that have better tax situations. How do you feel about that? Do you think they stay, these companies stay in New York? Are they actually based in other places but they have just local offices? What's the play for a company that's growing really fast and is generating so much revenue?
So that's kind of one of the main findings and help from the book, which is there is not one single playbook. There's not okay, that's the way you expand. If someone tells you that's the way you expand to the US, then you can't really run. Don't listen to them because it's way too simplify. We've narrowed it down to kind of 5 main archetypes as to how you expand internationally and especially how you expand to the US. It can go from your transplant, so you start actually in the US, which is kind of less relevant for us. Or you can, on the other extreme, you can have what we call the telescope mode, which is you sell in the US market entirely from Europe. And which of those, and then there's different kind of variations in between. And which of those models and which of those archetypes you are depends on 2 main things. One is the size of the US market for you. So what percentage of your revenue is going to come from the US? And 2 is what is your go-to-market strategy? Is it marketing-led? So let's say if you are a gaming company, you sell on the App Store, mostly performance marketing, you can do it from Helsinki or Stockholm or Paris. If you're enterprise sales, so very sales-led, you're selling to mid-market, middle America corporates, you have to have American people on the ground who are going to convince them to spend, few 100K or a few million on your product, different archetypes are relevant. And then in terms of whether it's New York or San Francisco, what we found is that about 80% of founders pick one of those two locations. The previous cohort was more New York, less San Francisco. This current cohort, 2019 to 2024, so this past 5 years, been more SF and less New York, but it's pretty close. And I think obviously AI is a bit more in San Francisco right now. New York has, to your point, more advantage in terms of time zone. So it's kind of somewhere between those two. By and large, that's the choice. And then you have a bit of Boston. It's kind of 8%. A bit of LA, like 4-5%. And then the rest is like, you have some folks go to Denver for sales, some Miami, but those are like really long tail. By and large, 80% plus, it's New York or San Francisco.
How important is for European companies to move to US at some point, also in order to get more capital to keep growing? Because I imagine that there is like a bottleneck in Europe once you reach Series B or Series C. Like probably there's not that much capital available, and at that stage you are probably considering like being stronger in the US. Yeah. So is that like the right stage to move to the US and also raise capital from the US to keep growing?
Our recommendation is that it's easier to be born global than to go global. That's kind of one of the taglines from the book. So the earlier you can think about the US and the rest of the world, the better. It doesn't mean you have to go there when you start, but I think making sure you architect your team and your product and your go-to-market in a global way when it's relevant for you, then that's very important. What we found from the book is that companies, the most recent cohort of companies, of European venture-backed companies, have a presence in the US much earlier than the previous generation. About almost 2/3 of them have a US presence by seed or pre-seed stage, so really early, so truly born global, which we think is great. And I think we should get as close to 100% as possible, because to your point, there's a massive opportunity to sell in the US and build in Europe. So we think that's extremely important. In terms of motivations to expand to the US, capital is number 2 and quite far behind number 1. The number 1 reason by far, more than 3/4 of the companies that we asked told us that the reason why they went to the US was for customers. And the US software market is more than twice the size of the European software market, and it's also much faster in making decisions, in buying. In general, I mean, it's a bit of a simplification, but if you're on a very high level, a US corporate buyer would look at a new product, a new startup, thinking, that's interesting. It can give me an edge, a competitive edge, and I can do better, faster than my competition. So I should be the first one to use it. While the European corporate will more think, that's new, that's not proven, that's risky. Why don't I just wait and see? At some point they will still buy it. And that's why there is a real software market in Europe, which is sizable. But in terms of pace of adoption, you typically get more traction, especially on the enterprise side, but also on the consumer side in the US earlier. So in those first years, which is so critical to get that first mass and those first orders, being in the US and selling in the US can help you grow a lot faster in the early years. And that's what will typically define your pace of growth in the outer years as well.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. And in terms of being an investor, how different is the market? So you have been doing a lot of deals in Europe for the last decade. Now you are based in the US. I guess that you are investing only in the US right now?
I'm investing globally, and that's the index approach as well. So we don't think in terms of Europe or US, and that's also the message from this book, is really the born global. That's the message, and that's the mindset, and that's the index mindset. We have the same team across geos. So we have an office in San Francisco, in London, and in New York, but we all look at everything together. The investment committees are global, so we don't have a strategy for Europe or a strategy for the US, so we don't compare, that's the best company in Europe, that's the best company. No, we think, is that the best company in that category globally? And so we don't really differentiate. And so we don't think about kind of how do we compare. If you're asking my personal experience, I think it is clear that there is more competition in the US. I think especially on the West Coast. I think New York feels a little bit more like Europe. It's a slightly smaller ecosystem. Everyone knows each other. It's very welcoming, very kind of collaborative. think the West Coast is kind of clearly more competitive. There's more people, maybe, then there's just
Faster.
more competition. It's faster. It's, and people are really fighting to get into rounds. And, if you're not in there, there's no room for you. So it is a more competitive environment. There are also more opportunities just in absolute numbers. So all in all, we look at where are the best opportunities globally, and we want to win in those best opportunities globally. I don't really think, okay, we need to invest in the best company in New York. No, we want to invest in the best company globally.
And Martin, you've invested in companies like Revolut.
Yeah.
And really early on, no? Like I think you invested in Revolut in the seed round.
At the seed round,
That's
yeah.
correct.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
Crazy.
That's crazy. How was that? Can you tell us the story? How was Nick at the time? Like, what did it look like? Obviously, like now you see it. It's a huge company. Everyone uses Revolut. I think we've been using.
Everyone should use it if they are not yet. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but back in the day, like it's not so easy to see, hey, this is going to succeed. How was that?
Yeah, I think I first saw Nick pitch at SeedCamp, if I remember correctly. And I was a user of the product already, so I was a big fan of the product. That's where being French and kind of continental European was an advantage because I experienced the pain point directly. And I was kind of transferring money between the euro and pounds, and I felt like the existing solutions, TransferWise was a big improvement, but I always felt like the mobile experience of TransferWise wasn't as seamless as it could have been. I came in with a prepared mind because I had looked at that kind of neobank market quite a bit. I had looked at a company called Simple in the US, which was the first kind of neobank, but hadn't really worked. So spent time with the Monzo team. So I had kind of a prepared mind. And I thought that Revolut, what I loved with Revolut is they had which the others didn't have at the time, they had a very narrow and very clear differentiation and a very clear wedge, which you could tell anyone in the world. Because the challenge with neobanks, if you tell people, oh, you should download this app, this is going to be a mobile bank, people are like, I already have my bank and they have a mobile app, why should I download XYZ? You don't really have a trigger. Revolut was a very simple trigger, which was you are traveling to Spain, you should get a Revolut card because the FX is much better. So they had this really simple hook, which meant they grew organically for a very long time without any marketing, just referral and just word of mouth, which in consumer is a really important dimension. And then once you try it, you're like, wow, actually the app is pretty cool. And then maybe why don't I use this card to do other things? And why don't you, then they started adding this kind of multi-product strategy, which was incredibly successful. And so that was really, I thought the product vision was great. I thought the wedge was very powerful. The market obviously, was very large. I think the challenge is, and why it wasn't obvious for everyone at the time, and why it was a pretty contrarian investment, was kind of twofold. One was that the company was gross margin negative for the longest time because they were giving away free FX and they didn't have a revenue model, they didn't have the subscription, the interchange was very low. So they had no crypto, all of that came later, and they had very small scale. So they didn't get good pricing on all of the tools that they were using, all the infrastructure they were using. So they were losing money on every single customer, which wasn't that attractive, obviously, in the early days. And that's why I think a lot of people passed on that. And then Nick wasn't your typical tech founder. He was a trader, came from finance background, was clearly a super smart guy, and a lot of really interesting insight. But he also had a lot of non-conventional wisdom. What's remarkable with Nick is the absolute, to me, is everyone says, oh, first principle thinker. Everyone is a first principle thinker. Very few people are first principle thinkers. Nick truly is a first principle thinker. And so he thought through a lot of things on his own and came to really interesting and different findings and conclusions. So, multi-product strategy, multi-geo strategy, very, very unusual. And usually you would say, a fintech has to be very local because a lot of compliance, very complex. So you start in one country and then maybe you expand to a second country. But he thought, doesn't make sense. It's the same. The products are the same. You may sell them differently. You may have slightly different KYC and so on, but the product offering is the same. The code base is the same. Whether you're selling in Lithuania or in France, it's the same product. It's the same code base. The only thing that's maybe different is the UI and the onboarding flow and some of the compliance things, but the rest is the same. So in his mind, it was very clear that having a single code base to serve all products to all markets was the future, and that there was a real opportunity to build the global money app, which was from the get-go, that was his vision. And that was very contrarian. No one was really doing that at the time because, it was more expensive at first and more complex to manage. And so people, were scared about that. And of course, it was harder at the beginning. But then now, once you went through the painful part, then it's beautiful because you start having global network effects. You have more scale, so you can invest more. You can launch more product and more countries. And the thing gets easier and easier as you get bigger versus harder and harder. If you start with one country, right, and then you have to expand country by country, every country is harder. But when you start globally, then everything is easier as you scale, and that's also one of the lessons from the book. So he had a lot of those things. The other thing was he thought most of the tech should be in-housed. So we're at the time where everyone was buying off-the-shelf Fintech infrastructure, and he did a bit of that, but he also developed a lot of things in-house. And people are like, that's crazy, you have this tool, why would you do that? We're like, well, today it's painful, but in the future, we're going to be in total control of our destiny. We'll have much lower cost, meaning we'll be able to kind of offer cheaper price, more integrated, better experience. And again, at scale. So he built for scale from the beginning, which was a very unusual thing. And so he had a few of those very deep insights that now happen to be totally right. But at the time, I think scared a bunch of people off. And also he wasn't, I would say that one thing is, he wasn't the best at explaining how he came to this. To him, it was so obvious. It was like, yeah, that's how you do it. And people were like, but why? Like, well, it makes more sense. Like, okay, but that's not how these other companies are doing it. And so I think now that's something that I look for a lot in founders. It's like, are they original thanks to first principle thinking? Like, can their intelligence and insight bring them to original conclusions and original takes on products or go to market or strategy? And if you have that, those are the things that I really gravitate to.
That's crazy. And yeah, talking about this, how do you make investment decisions now? Obviously, Revolut was a long time ago already, and you've seen so many companies grow now from zero to huge companies. What are the things that excite you now? And how do you make those decisions? What's the process?
Yeah, I think early on in my career, I was quite intuitive in many ways. If I liked a product and I thought the market was big enough, I thought, I was more willing to kind of take risk. Then later on, you see a lot of things that work well, you see a lot of things that don't work well. So you start developing those, frameworks and being a lot more systematic. And I think, there is danger in that. I think my learning, now I went back to kind of the first approach in many ways, which is trying to keep a beginner's mind and dream the dream and not focus. It's very easy to focus on the downside, the risk, the key, what is not totally obvious and what is not great. And so it's very easy to pass on everything. Everything will have, quirks that are, not pretty. And so, but I think going back to those basic principles, in terms of, to me, is that founder a true original first principle thinker? That's all the other categories. Do they have hustle? Do they have grit? Do they have, resilience? Intensity, energy, all that for sure. But to me, the unique trait I look for is are they telling me something that I don't know? And how did they get to that conclusion, how did they get to that unique insight? Was that through a well thought out process, which means in the future, when they have other challenges, will they be able to apply this method to solve their next problem and keep on coming up with new, interesting, original ideas? And that's really what I kind of graded toward, really this kind of, this on the founder. I go back to the founder and then more and more following my instinct, back to following my instinct, my intuition, and really focusing on the dream versus overanalyzing and trying to be too smart too early.
Yeah, and another thing that we talk about all the time is how is it possible for really young people to start a company and in 2 years have a $1 billion company, or in 3 years, kind of like Alexander Wu from Scale AI. How you've worked with a lot of those people. Like, how do you see them changing? Like, because obviously, like, it can't be like the same person that is managing like the pre-seed round with no revenues to, you know, like a huge company in a short time of period. So how is that possible? How does that happen?
Well, I mean, they tend to have a few characteristics. One is insane work ethic. You know, they work incredibly hard. You know, like 24/7 pretty much. You know, they work all the time for a long time. I think that has to be said. I mean, it's just, and that's a prerequisite. There's no magic. Like, if you want to grow that fast, because you need to hire very fast, you need to make product decisions very fast, you make mistakes. So, you know, you hire someone and then they won't, you know, they fail. You have to, you know, let them go, hire the next person. So you have to have two important dimensions. One is move very fast, take a lot of decisions. And so for that, you need speed and time of work, like a hard work, you know?
Not afraid of failing.
Exactly. And then be not afraid of failing. And then you have to learn very fast from those mistakes. So you have to have this algorithm that learns incredibly quickly and adjusts. And so that's why, you know, we put IndexPress together. So those are resources that we share as many stories as possible and as many playbooks and learnings from the past 3 decades of investing that we've seen. But this is not the playbook. Like the reality, like the next most successful company, like Revolut, will be different from any single one of those companies. They won't be like Revolut. They won't be like Spotify. They will be their own thing, and hopefully they will take from some of those learnings. But again, they will go through their own first principle thinking as to what works for them. You know, for Nick, it's very much super data driven, super process, super systematic, where you have like a lot of very quick feedback loop. Everyone knows exactly where they are on their performance, how they're going to get compensated. Like, so everything is totally explicit, totally data driven. There's an algorithm that builds the company because that's who he is. It fits with his style and his belief systems and the way he wants to run the business. Everything kind of flows through him. He makes a lot of decisions. He's very deep in the business. And that works really well for them and for him. But it won't work exactly like that for the next company. So you can't just apply the Revolut playbook to any company because it has to fit with the founders. And the founder has to come to their own design and their own conclusion based on their style, their desire, the way they work, and their own thought process based on what they see within their team and within their market.
Yeah, it's like if you follow what worked for others, it's like buying the same like lottery ticket number that worked for another person. No? I think that the changes.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, like everything is constantly changing. Yeah. Your personality is different. The region you are selling, like the sector, no. So you need like to build your own system, but it's always good, maybe to learn more from the errors of others, no?
Yeah.
To not make them.
I think you can learn from both. I think you can. I think there are typically, if you think about expanding to the US, there is one typical error mode, which is trying to outsource it. So you say, okay, I'm going to hire a very senior, very seasoned head of US. And that person is going to take care of it. You know, then done. Tick. That's the US strategy done, is I hire this very senior person and they're going to go and figure out because they're great. That never works. So that is a typical mistake. Like if you do that, 95% chance that it fails. So at least that you know not to do that.
Yeah, in the case of Index, you didn't hire someone in the US. Like you moved yourself to New York.
Exactly. So why doesn't it work? Well, it's very simple. One is if you hire someone very senior from a big name firm, it means that most of the time they won't have done the 0 to 1. They won't necessarily be entrepreneurial. They would have been used to having a team. So they will hire a large team of people who do the work for them. But no, it's a startup. You need to do the work yourself. That's problem number one. Problem number two is these people, if they are interested to joining you as an unknown European startup, it means by definition they are not the very best in their field. The very best in their field, they go and they join OpenAI or Anthropic or Datadog or established US businesses. If you're successful in the US, in Europe, US candidates, they don't know about you, they don't care about you. So you will only attract second-tier talent at the senior level. So as a result, that's why it never works. What does work, if you want to have a physical plan in the US, is, to your point, sending one of the co-founders with a few people from the European team who know the culture, know the people in Europe, can really keep that bridge and keep that culture and export it to the US. And then you hire a couple of junior folks, high potential, usually technical sales if you're selling, enterprise software, for example. And these people, they learn much faster. A few of them, even most of them won't work out. They will be okay. They will be junior folks. And, you will find a few that do work, and you teach them the culture and the way to do things. And they will bring you the knowledge of the market, of the local customers, and you will create that bridge to make sure the product matches with the market. But that's one where we have strong opinion as to what works and what doesn't work. But there are a lot of other areas where it's not as clear cut.
Absolutely, makes a lot of sense. And how do you see now also like the world changing with AI? So now we see companies that are like reaching 70 million ARR in 2 or 3 years. That didn't happen in the past.
Yeah.
You saw in the past like companies investing a lot of money before they started to grow revenues.
Yeah.
Now it's like the opposite, no? It's like revenue first, growing super fast, and building on that, no? So, and revenue, like multiples are also super high right now. Probably churn is also very high.
Yeah.
Yeah. What's your take on this new world, and how are you adapting as an investor?
Again, there is no one size fits all answer. You have some companies that grow very fast and have a lot of churn, and you have companies that grow very fast and have very sticky revenue. And so I think you have you have a bit of both. And the goal of as an investor, your goal is to pick the one that grows very fast and has a lot of retention versus the very churny one.
Yeah, but you want to pick them before that is happening.
Yeah,
right?
but I think some categories are better suited to a lot of retention than others. So I think that's your job as an investor. I think that's the challenge with AI. It's like you can see very fast top line growth, but then you can plateau pretty rapidly if you have a lot of churn. So you have to be quite discerning. I think higher level what we're seeing, and after studying, and we talk a little bit about it in the book, is that we see AI companies for a similar level of revenue as the previous generation. They typically need 20% fewer employees. So it's not 90, but it's not 100. So there's clearly some efficiency gain. We also looked at AI first companies, so like the top AI, let's say AI native companies, comparing them to the top SaaS companies. And we found that they got to 500 employees in 4 years versus 5 years for the previous cohorts, which means that with the previous stat means that revenue is growing a lot faster and headcount is also growing faster, but you still have productivity gain because revenue is, grows even faster than headcount. But I think this whole idea of AI companies don't hire anyone, we don't see it in the data. So that it's not what it's showing. Actually they're hiring even faster, but the revenue is growing even faster than the previous generations. And so, I think that's kind of what we're seeing. Having said that, what we see as well is that especially for coding, the pace of improvement of the code gen products is incredibly fast. So whatever findings we had 6 months ago is probably not relevant today. And I have concrete examples of teams of more established companies maybe using like older code base saying 6 months ago, maybe it's a 10% improvement, but actually sometimes it makes me waste time because it's incorrect and I have to correct it and I have to double check. So it's kind of pretty marginal. 2 weeks ago I had this conversation, now it's like 40-50% more efficient. The same people. So the only change is not them, it's the underlying tool. So that's the pace of improvement. So I think we are going to start seeing really widespread productivity gains, especially in coding, which is clearly the most productive and most advanced field right now. And then we probably are going to start seeing that in other areas, mostly, customer support, customer success, probably sales, marketing. So it's going to start spreading. Today we're seeing a little bit there, but we're seeing a lot in code dev. I think that trend is going to apply to every other functions. But again, you have to track it almost on a week by week basis because that's how quickly those progress are happening now.
And if you were to build a company right now, imagine you never worked at Index, but you have your knowledge, what would you build?
That's a great question. The reason why I decided not to be become an entrepreneur and not start a company is that I think I trust entrepreneurs and I trust them. I trust the wisdom of the crowd, and I think there's millions of entrepreneurs out there starting every day, trying new things, putting technology together to try to solve a new problem. And I think they have a much higher likelihood. The odds of these millions of people finding the next Revolut is 10x or probably 1,000x higher than me having the idea of the next company. And so I am humble enough to say I admire entrepreneurs. I love working with them, and I trust those large number of entrepreneurs to be the one finding the next great company, and hopefully we can I can end up investing in them. But I don't have the hubris to pretend to know what the next big thing will be. And again, it goes back to this characteristic that I look for in entrepreneurs. The one I really love and I want to invest in, the one that come to me and they tell me something that I had no idea about. They will give me an insight. Well, it's usually a pretty obvious insight, but they see some trend and that everyone can see, but they see it and they have a different take on it, usually because they've been first principle and they've been thinking through it, in a unique way. And, it's Nick at Revolut saying, well, FX should be free because you have so much volume that the marginal cost is zero. So if the marginal cost is zero, the price should be zero. And then you sell other things. OpenAI, same thing, very simple insight. Scaling laws. The more data you feed those models, the better the performance is going to be. So you need to raise a lot of money to kind of have a lot of compute and feed a lot of data. And if you think about every single successful company, that's how they started, and you can build massive businesses on one simple, basic insight.
Yeah.
But only these people had them before anybody else did because they had this unique insight. And that to me, that's the magic. When I go into a meeting and I hear that unique insight that is backed by, real evidence and laws of nature and laws of technology, that's when you really need to pound. Even if the founder is, a bit quirky or, the market feels crowded or whatever it is, when you hear that unique insight, you just go for it.
That's fantastic.
And how should these founders reach out to you?
I'm on LinkedIn. You ping me on LinkedIn. They can, have my email is on the Index website, so I respond to everyone. Just reach out and you get a very, very quick response.
That's fantastic. Well, then, thank you so much, Martin, for doing this. It was a pleasure, and I think we learned a lot. So
thanks for the great question.
And
loved it.
Amazing resources, by the way. I love scaling through chaos. And winning in the US, it's also fantastic.
Yeah, look, I really appreciate, we're trying to give back to the community. We've been doing this for 30 years. We've got a lot of learning. We've got access to a lot of amazing entrepreneurs and a lot of stories. Some we've seen ourselves. Some, unfortunately, we didn't invest in, but we still, know them well and they were nice enough to share it. So I want to thank those entrepreneurs and I want to thank you guys for, putting the word out there. Hopefully this will be helpful to a lot of European founders. And again, the message is, keep being ambitious. Don't believe what politicians say that you need to focus on Europe or focus on the US. Think global from day one. Be born global. And if you have this ambition, here is the playbook and some of the playbooks that you can use and some of the mistakes to avoid and some of the things to do. But you have to make it your own. But go global from day one. Have this ambition because you have a unique advantage right now in Europe that you have great talent at great cost and very loyal and high quality. And you can sell globally and especially in the US. So this is the moment. You can build a category leader starting from Europe. So, go for it.
Yeah, it's easier than ever to compete globally.
Yeah.
With AI and with global distribution, with content.
Why not try? Why limit yourself to a single market?
Exactly. Yeah. So thank you very much.
Awesome.
Thanks,
guys.
We will see you later in the conference.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks.